that Eudoxia is celebrating again today, trying to make an impact in the lives of, in the society. So yes, I joined in late because of the time differences, but the little that I picked up was something that came to my mind to say that I think one of the people here, the presenters or the speakers, said something very, very touching to me to say that um, we don't know. I mean, we don't know whether we will be able to catch up in terms of the development of AI and technology. And that is, to me, that is very, very real, because if you look at where we started within Eudoxia, and now there's been so much, evolution, such that we really need to keep up by reskilling, by upskilling, by learning, unlearning, and relearning. So this is a very, very pertinent topic, and I'm very, very happy to have got a glimpse of it. Now, coming on to today's business, um, I I would like to share my perspectives, or to add to at least add to the discussion on looking at our RAMAS 5.0, where I feel like we also need to touch on AI, ethics, and human expertise in science, in healthcare, and in higher education, where we are trying to balance the innovation, literacy, and definitely responsible practice. So, having said that, um, I would like to continue and ask. Oh, huh? Something is not right. Just give me a minute. Sorry. Um, I hope I'm still sharing.
Yes, so your screen is, yeah.
All right. So, so with Ramas 5.0 conference, I would like to frame it this way, where we are saying this conference brings together eminent academicians, researchers, and healthcare professionals from across the globe. I'm sure you can see that the whole point is to deliberate, as we have already started deliberating on emerging digital realities of 2026. And one of those issues was the reskilling and upskilling. But it all leads to transformative integration, where we are saying this is one of the scientific visions of Eudoxia and RAMAS 5.0, where we explore the rapid convergence, rapid, as we were saying, uh, the convergence of technology, of medical practice, and higher education, and to understand how generative workflows reshape the traditional structures. I'm sure the first speaker has already touched that one on that one and set the tone. This is a global academic alliance where we could, discuss regional divides within the, within regions, within countries, within provinces, ensuring equal access, as we are all connected right now to computational research tools. A lot of other people will join, they will present, and they will show us different research tools that they are using. And at the same time, we are protecting, we are protecting local knowledge, sovereignty in the age of centralized learning language models. We are also looking at the fact that RAMAS should be able to affirm that advanced computational structures must serve as an augmented adjunct, as an assistant, never as absolute replacement for human empathy, for ethics, and moral agency. So there comes the reskilling again, because if we are not going to be replaced, then it means that we have to be upskilled. And then, of course, there are people here from various walks of life, from various disciplines, and these discussions, please, let's go ahead. Let's have these interdisciplinary deliberations where we are united, uniting diverse fields from clinical nursing and drug discovery to humanities. I know, I'm very certain that there will be presentations here from psychology, from education, and administrative leadership, HR, and other areas. This is all done under a shared ethical paradigm where we are emphasizing on ethics. So, moving on, let's look at the computational landscape. What is the status quo right now? Where we want to analyze the statistical landscape and the institutional development of AI adoption across clinical, academic, and research ecosystems globally. If you were to, it would be interesting for you to see that in terms of institutional policies, nearly 67% of global higher education institutions have actively formulated or are currently drafting formal guidance policies for AI usage in teaching and publishing. That just shows you the movement where we are trying to catch up to technology, and this is mainly through CPD. CPD, I mean, continuous professional development, which is pointing towards upskilling. If we look at the adoption benchmark, there are over 100 million people, where we see that there is now a hyper acceleration of generative tool access, which represent the fastest industrial shift in history, requiring rapid workforce reskilling. And last but not least, 78% publishing rigor. You see that now a vast majority of high impact medical and scientific journals, they now mandate explicit written disclosure regarding computational co-authorship, regarding the involvement of AI and related technology in as far as authorship is concerned. And I think you will agree with me that this points towards ethics as well. So these structural benchmarks, to me, they show that AI has transitioned, has moved from an elective research tool to a core infrastructure that is driving an urgent need for standardized, agreed upon worldwide ethical frameworks. Therefore, if I were to look at the dynamics, the dynamics here, where we are confronting a dual kind of sword of intelligence systems, accelerating discovery while at the same time systematically guarding scientific rigor. So we can look at innovation versus essential safeguards, because we don't want stop this shift, this acceleration. But all we can do is to develop essential safeguards, where in terms of the innovation engine, we have automated synthesis, for example, where there is instant processing of thousands of scientific literature sources to locate novel research clusters. Okay? While the safeguard here would be ensuring information integrity, preventing data slop, if we could use the word, automated hallucinations, and algorithmic dilution of actual scientific evidence. I will speak about this dilution later on. But on the other side, clinically, we need clinical documentation where we are relieving clinicians of ambient paperwork, so much paperwork, so that they can focus on direct patient engagement. Here we're mainly referring to administrative duties that can be sort of relieved by this innovative engine, this automation, which can also help us with clinical documentation. But then there are issues where we would need to ensure intellectual protection in this by safeguarding the academic property and clinical privacy of patients and peer researchers. Remember, we sometimes talk about academic property, patents, etc. So this is a safeguard to make sure that we are working with innovation, but in a responsible manner. Personalized pedagogy here, we are constructing real-time feedback, the use of different apps and dynamic learning loops for international student bodies. We have the IIP program, the faculty development programs. This is part of the innovation steps taken by Eudoxia. But we also need to look at how we can safeguard, where we preserve empathy, guaranteeing that human clinical judgment and diagnostic intuition remain the leading agency. Diagnostic intuition here, we are saying it is a machine-human partnership. Otherwise, machines will not give us empathy. So we might be losing it. That's why we need to develop safeguarding rails. So how do we then deconstruct these intelligent modalities? In other words, artificial intelligence, how is it going to become deconstructed into its exact technical modalities to establish a precise conceptual foundation? For example, AI, here we are saying, what is AI generally? The broad technological landscape involving use of algorithms to drive the behavior of agents, software systems, and robotics to solve complex cognitive tasks. Think of education, think of individual learning programs, think of modules, think of patients, how patients can be connected to so many different machines in order to gather in vivo, data which will help whoever is working with that patient to understand what is going on and how can this patient be assisted. Then we have another group, which is the machine learning and big data, where we are looking at statistical methodologies where software optimizes patterns from vast data sets. So this is very high volume, high velocity, and variety of data and formats without explicit hard-coded instructions. Then you have the generative side, which has also been, evolved into agentic versus generative AI. where we have advanced transformer-based deep learning systems engineered to produce high contextual text, media, pictures, images, or structures by modeling the probabilistic distributions of human datasets. So, having characterized these, one would then look at where do we as human beings collaborate with technology, specifically AI. Let's look at the first framework here, where we're saying the human AI collaboration spectrum is a core conceptual taxonomy mapping task delegation and accountability. In other words, in the human loop, the system's role, we have the active assistant who recommends structural options, formats text, and breaks down data, passes data. That is the system role. Whereas the collaborative side, now the human role would be to be the direct pilot, to determine the direction by leading every judgment call, by validating the source outputs and owning final accountability as a human. So the human agency is high. There is 0% auto execution. It is a collaborative aspect. The system role can also have co-pilot duties, generating preliminary data drafts, outlines, and ambient clinical files automatically. Okay? And what is the role of us as humans? The human role is as reviewer who intervenes to override sometimes algorithmic drift. You know, this drift where this it keeps being diluted such that you need to be reading and following the situation as a human. So where you're going to check anomalous data and edit this draft. There you can see that there is a shared agency triggered intervention. But when the human is out of the loop, the system is now an autonomous agent which operates closed loop data, pipelines, logistic, or rapid scheduling. It's operating on its own. The human role here is that of auditor. It oversees system parameters and evaluates macroscopic system performance. Here there is a high auto execution. So these are the different scenarios that we can expect in this framework of human AI collaboration spectrum. But what is important is that we are aware of the role of each, the role of the human as the ultimate overseer, and the role of the system as an ultimate tool to accelerate productivity. Then there is a horizon of opportunity here, unlocking human potential by shifting labor from manual processing to advanced synthetic oversight and creative design. This catalyzes human capabilities, as we can see, by amplifying labor productivity, where we are saying automating administrative chores, transcription of audio, data, and basic text formatting releases thousands of cognitive hours for deep qualitative intellectual work. I think that has been said for a long time on this platform. There is also accelerated data synthesis, where there is analysis of millions of raw data points, protein folds for the alpha 54, or demographic data at scale to identify hidden correlations, to accelerate experimental cycles, to accelerate drug discovery. And this is, in a way, democratizes advanced tools by lowering the entry barriers for coding, for example, code pen. Um, I've seen people, asking your AI tool to write Python code, to do visualizations, data translation, and even baseline writing. That fosters a flatter and more inclusive global scientific workspace, which is a good thing to see. And then, of course, we have breakthrough domains where we analyze real world acceleration vectors across three central areas of interest because we want to see the applications here. Healthcare and nursing, for example, decision diagnostics, where we have augmented imaging and data matching to detect clinical anomalies earlier. Ambient charting, where we have passive speech to text generation clinical drafts, reducing charting burdens. And care coordination, where there's real time predictive patient routing and telemetry tracking. You have this patient lying on the bed and they have so many gadgets that are collecting data. That's the application that we're talking about. Whereas in scientific research, predictive folding, for example, systems like AlphaFold solving 50-year protein challenges in weeks. Synthetic discovery, where we have rapid in silico testing of compound variations from custom drug formulations, clustering trends, with real-time mapping of millions of paper abstracts to track paradigm shifts. Whereas in higher education, also we've seen that there is a breakthrough in terms of intelligent tutors with dynamic feedback systems helping international students with language gaps, with abilities, sort of differentiated abilities, curriculum design, where there is synthesis of modern, most cross-disciplinary literature that can be configured into course syllabus. And then we have an operational ease as an add-on here where we are managing administrative enrollments, student data, and course registration flows seamlessly. This is the applied acceleration practices in these three areas of special interest as pertaining to RAMAS. But we have ethical challenges. We must confront these structural risks, the systemic inequalities and algorithm vulnerabilities embedded in unmonitored system deployments, where we just deploy the system without monitoring. Yes, we know that there's bias amplification. We know that there is data slop crisis. We know that there might be information asymmetry and moral agency erosion. So these are some of the things. For example, with bias amplification, the algorithms will have been trained on historical data sets. These carry and sometimes exacerbate systemic, for example, racism, gender bias, historical exclusions of certain populations or certain ethnic groups. This formalizes the bias as an objective truth. So it is important that we are aware of such a challenge. And I was talking about the data slope crisis, where there is a proliferation of unverified, synthetic, made up and AI generated manuscripts, which dilutes high quality peer reviewed databases and encourages predatory scientific publishing. That is another challenge. Whereas in terms of information asymmetry, this concentrates the state of the art computational infrastructure in high wealth regions, for example, up north, which deepens global inequalities, leaving underfunded global southern universities behind in as far as technology adoption and embracing and adoption are concerned. So these are challenges that really affect us that we need to talk about and we need to mitigate against. And now let's look at I'll talk about automation bias and algorithmic drift, as I promised earlier on, where we simply accept passive acceptance, where we accept bias. Automation bias represents this psychological tendency of human experts to trust automated machine outputs, even when their personal clinical or academic training points to an error. But this silent delegation will degrade the active expert judgment over time. And that is automation bias, which we must be aware of. Excuse me. Also, we must be aware of algorithmic drift, which results in the churning out of degraded outputs. LLM models will suffer from systemic drift, where the quality, the logical consistency, and source accuracy of our outputs quietly change under retraining or feedback loops is introduced unannounced factual errors. So let us be aware that also we have this soporific complicity where we simply, when software routinely produces good enough drafts, human operators naturally fall into a state of passive compliance, systematically overlooking subtle, for example, clinical hallucinations or technical errors. That is something that we need to look at as pitfalls of automation bias and the quiet decay of individual critical verification. In other words, we need to verify, we need to look for bias from our use of AI tools. We need not accept anything just at face value. We also must be aware of algorithmic drift such that our outputs may not necessarily be comparable to what individuals would do manually. Perhaps AI tools will show us very good patterns, but we always look at it with a human eye. Then the second framework that I want to talk about here is the active symbiosis paradigm. That's aligning automated execution with systematic human checkpoints. Human intention in the first phase here, the expert would design or define the clinical hypothesis or the classroom goals or analytical scope. The machine acts as a passive executor, parsing meaning breaking down initial inputs. In the second phase, then the algorithmic engine, the machine compiles multivariant drafts, matches historical diagnosis, or outlines pedagogical pathways at very high speeds, outputting options, different options now. Then the last phase would be expert verification now, where the clinician or academic must review raw sources, must edit structural hallucinations, and sign off on the final output because accountability remains strictly human. Accountability remains strictly human. I'm repeating that one because we are looking at the symbiosis paradigm where it's human machine relationship or collaboration. So what do we mean here by professional judgment versus algorithmic efficiency? We'll look at it in terms of core dimensions. The value system, for example, the human professional judgment is grounded in empathy, in ethics, in moral duty, and centered clinical care. Whereas the algorithmic automation is driven by mathematical optimization and pattern extraction. So you see now that we need the empathy, we need the ethics, we need the moral duty centered on humans. How about when it comes to task execution? The human will adapt to unpredicted situations, unique contextual nuances, adapt, act, take action, whereas algorithmically exceptional and high volume data passing and routine drafting. Accountability is another factor where the ultimate legal, ethical, and clinical outcomes solely lie with the human, whereas in machines, there is zero moral agency. It operates strictly as a technical assistant, as a technical adjunct. How about the failure modality? We subject, it could be subject to mental fatigue and cognitive fatigue, but, the human can always rest, take a nap, get back, think about it. Whereas the machine is prone to factual hallucinations and systemic bias that we must be aware of. So this structural composition underscores the importance of the human element in the use of these AI tools, because without it, everything just goes on autopilot, including an erosion of moral agency and a proliferation of factual hallucinations and systemic bias. We can look at clinical nursing and healthcare, where we can evaluate the clinical, legal, and operational boundaries of intelligent systems in patient-centered nursing. Empathy and the human touch, that's one of the clinical imperatives, where, according to the American Nurses Association Center for Ethics and Human Rights, there is an emphasis that compassion, trust, and touch are the central elements of professional nursing practice. So the empathy boundaries here, AI can feed or route medications, but cannot replicate intuitive nursing care. Intuitive nursing care where the nurse is on top of the situation, they are at the side of the patient. Reduced patient-clinician interactions will degrade therapeutic healing outcomes. Non-replacement accountability. According to 2025 Code of Ethics for Nurses, clinical algorithms are strictly assisted technologies, adjunct technologies, not human replacements. So nurses remain fully accountable for patient care, even during a system failure. Professional nursing judgment must therefore override predictive algorithmic recommendations when anomaly cues appear. So that's just to emphasize that we need this partnership more than running things on autopilot. Let's look at a case study, sepsis early warning, CDSS, a major healthcare system that deployed an automated, predictive clinical decision support system, CDSS, designed to monitor patients' vitals and trigger real-time early alerts for potential sepsis onset, organ failure. So the alert fatigue breakdown here is that the algorithm optimized for extreme sensitivity generated a massive volume of false positive warnings. This resulted in clinical alert fatigue. Nurses that fell into passive compliance, automation bias, ignoring valid notifications, while others manually overrode the alerts because the software fails to capture patient behavioral context. This is just a scenario, by the way. So you have 90% false positive rate. Highly sensitive triggers cause alert saturation and clinical fatigue. So what do we learn from this case study? Is that context is king. Diagnostics require human observational intuition, which is missing from numeric telemetry databases. That's one thing to learn from, that even though we are depending on AI automation, AI tools, we must be aware that context is king. The nurse, the health professional will work with context in order to make sure that if there are any hallucinations, they can be corrected in time to the patient's benefit. In scientific research, in the labs, for example, authorship and accountability, where we are saying international publishing coalitions such as COPE, they have clarified that AI systems cannot be credited as authors. I think that point has been driven home on this platform because they possess no legal or moral agency. So authors are fully accountable for all content, including any algorithmically generated portions. Hence, that critical thinking, critical analysis of outputs. Peer review needs to be rethought in the sense that relying on generative AI for peer review will risk compromising confidentiality and peer review integrity. Yes, most publishers would have this requirement that peer review should not be done using AI tools. So generative tools lack the nuanced understanding required to detect systemic, experimental flaws, or even fraud. So that is another area where, for example, we can look at a case study of Gen AI literature citations, where we can look at research misrepresentation, where a research group leveraged an unmonitored commercial large LLM to draft the entire prior art or background literature review sections of a clinical study manuscript. But then there were hallucinations and erroneous citations. The model generated highly convincing prose. The story reads beautifully, that included detailed citations of mock journals and fabricated clinical trial IDs. The error was only caught during formal peer review. This is when the reviewers noticed that the missing digital object identifiers, DOI, these were missing on the citations, the references. So in that case, that is a case of 0% accountability because systems have zero moral agency. Researchers remain solely liable. So the core lesson here is on source mapping, where we manually verify all literature mapping. that is mandatory to maintain publishing ethics. So that is one other scenario that I wanted us to be aware of, although we are simply emphasizing or preaching to the converted. That was a situation in writing. We can look at higher education transformation as well, where we are looking at, say, beyond rote memorization. The ubiquitous access to generative engines disrupts traditional text-only take-home assessments. Rote retrieval is now effectively automated. Universities must therefore transition toward evaluations that test higher order cognitive processing and synthesis. So instead of uh, requiring essays here and there, I think it's more of them, oral defense, for example, or metacognitive assessments, moving from passive essays to active, process-focused oral defenses. The Viva is one of those. Structured peer reviews and interactive collaborative portfolio structures, where, for example, group members could evaluate each other using things like rubrics. And then the human advantage is that curricula must deliberately prioritize skills. I think one of the, now in the discussion just earlier on, we're talking about skills, prioritizing skills that machines cannot simulate. Empathy, ethical deliberation, real-time collaboration, and holistic judgment, something that can be take, the form of rubrics that look at various aspects, give certain points or marks for each aspect, and then looking at it in a holistic manner. That would be something that would address this problem. Framework number 3, the AI-enabled active learning model, where the system outputs an automated generic draft review of a complex social or philosophical problem. And what does the student do? The student performs deep source checking, going through the DOIs and, going to the manual paper, article manually, isolating factual hallucinations and identifying implicit logic biases. This focuses on what we would call advanced skepticism, where every output is looked at with skepticism. Then you iterate and cohere. The system serves as an interactive sparring partner, adapting prompts, and offering conceptual angles. The student must direct this multi-stage prompt adjustment to systematically improve logical cohesion and structure. That means our prompt engineering has to be top-notch so that the focus becomes adaptive problem solving. Then when we synthesize and then we defend, it's because the system has compiled raw formatting and has organized structural bibliographies, but the student still defends the synthesis orally before, say, an academic committee explaining every conceptual design choice. And this way, the focus will be on comprehensive mastery as a skill. Then AI literacy and the future. I'm almost at the end of my presentation, and I would like us to map the 4 operational pillars of AI literacy alongside a predictive future scenario. We always imagine the future. The 4 pillars of AI literacy, here I would look at engaging that critically evaluating system outputs and limitations. That one is important. All outputs must be critically evaluated. The other aspect on creativity, on creating, is synthesizing data with ethical safeguards against bias and automated plagiarism that we have seen. Management, where there is delegation routines while maintaining human agency and veto powers. The human decides whether this goes or does not go. And in the designing part, the structural algorithms to serve human centered institutional goals. Oh, having said that, these are the four pillars that help us to be ethical in the use of AI tools and their outputs and embracing the output. But different institutions and individuals are at different levels of making these four pillars visible in as far as AI literacy is concerned. It must be incumbent on us to say, are we so exigent on ourselves? Are we so demanding on ourselves that we must follow this? Do we follow this in our practice? Do we critically evaluate our outputs? Do we check these outputs against existing articles and existing documents? So do we even synthesize with ethical safeguards? How do we delegate routines while we maintain that human agency? And how do we make sure that we reduce bias and other ills of AI and technology? Well, Horizon 2035, yes. The synthesized classroom and clinic, say, for example, by 2035, let's imagine ambient and predictive systems that handle 90% of routine technical coding, data coding, data collation, and clinical transcriptions. So that is the imagined situation. But who knows? We seem to be heading to such utopia. Yeah. So the value of a professional shift entirely to their capabilities in ethical oversight, qualitative synthesis, and intuitive judgment. High impact roles are occupied by those individuals that are trained to manage automated systems, to verify clinical anomalies, and to defend intellectual integrity. That is the high value of a professional in the coming years. To verify clinical anomalies, to manage automated systems, and to defend intellectual integrity, meaning defending the choice of instruments, the choice of your methodology, defending everything that was done with human oversight, with AI as an adjunct, as an assistant. So, I would like to propose an action roadmap before I finish to say 1 to 6 months. Perhaps we could mandate written AI disclosures for our institutions for research drafts, safeguard patient ambient clinical dictation privacy, and transition to oral defense portfolios. This is implementable in, say, 1 to 6 months, but I know that most other institutions are well advanced. Midterm wise, 1 to 2 years, to sit nation leads on institutional healthcare AI boards, even university AI boards, deploy open source LLMs to close global academic divides, and embed OECD literacy pillars, those four that I mentioned earlier on. So as a long-term project, perhaps incorporate blockchain databases to trace primary data sets, integrate clinical DSS telemetry, decisions, and launch custom collaborative degrees. This way, we could come out successfully in a much shorter time in terms of the development of institutions rather than individuals, because individuals come and go, but institutional policies will guide, will direct the future generations uh, into balancing computational innovation, AI literacy, and value driven responsible practice. And with that, I would like to thank you very much for your attention. And I wish all the presenters here present and those that will present even tomorrow all the best. And may we all develop ethics in our research practice. I thank you once again.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. And please keep being